Flight 847 from Denver to Miami should have been routine. 300 passengers, clear skies, perfect flying conditions. But the woman in seat 2A wasn't just any passenger. Dr. Sarah Chun had been running for 3 days straight, carrying knowledge that could destroy lives or save them. She thought she was finally safe at 35,000 feet. She was wrong. What happened next would turn a quiet Tuesday morning into a fight for survival that no one saw coming. This is the story of how one woman's secret became everyone's salvation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Chun adjusted her reading glasses and pulled the navy blazer tighter around her shoulders as she settled into seat 2A, the first-class cabin of United Flight 847 buzzed with the familiar pre-departure energy of business travelers checking phones, flight attendants reviewing safety protocols, and the occasional nervous flyer gripping armrests. Sarah appeared to be just another professional heading to Miami for meetings, her laptop bag tucked neatly under the seat in front of her. A cup of black coffee cooling on her tray table. She wasn't. For the past 72 hours, Sarah had been the most hunted woman in America, though no passenger on this Boeing 777 would have guessed it from her composed exterior. Her shoulder-length black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal but professional. She wore no jewelry, except for a simple gold wedding band that she twisted nervously around her finger whenever she thought no one was looking. To everyone around her, Dr. Sarah Chun appeared to be exactly what her boarding pass suggested, a consultant from Denver, heading to a conference in Florida. The truth was far more dangerous. Sarah was a microbiologist, and 3 days ago she had stumbled upon something that made her question everything she thought she knew about her employer, Meridian Pharmaceuticals. What started as routine quality testing on their new flu vaccine had revealed something that made her blood run cold. The vaccine wasn't just ineffective against the new strain of influenza spreading across the country, it was designed to make people more susceptible to it. She had spent 2 sleepless nights running additional tests, hoping she was wrong, praying that her initial findings were somehow contaminated or flawed. They weren't. Meridian wasn't just cutting corners on their vaccine development. They were actively sabotaging public health for reasons Sarah couldn't yet understand. When she tried to approach her supervisor, Dr. Marcus Webb, she found his office cleared out and his phone disconnected. When she attempted to contact the CDC directly, she discovered that her security clearance had been revoked and her access to the company's internal systems had been terminated. That's when Sarah knew she was in real danger. She had managed to copy the crucial data onto an encrypted drive before her access was cut off. But getting that information to the right people proved nearly impossible. Every official channel seemed compromised. Her calls to the FDA went unanswered. Her attempts to reach investigative journalists were met with suspicious silence. It was as if an invisible net was closing around her, cutting off every avenue of communication. The breaking point came on Monday night when she returned to her Denver apartment to find her front door ajar and her living room ransacked. Professional searchers had been through her belongings with surgical precision, looking for something specific. Sarah didn't wait to find out what they might have missed. She grabbed her emergency bag, the encrypted drive, and her passport, then slipped out through her building's service entrance into the Colorado night. She had been moving ever since, paying cash for everything, avoiding cameras when possible, and trying to stay ahead of whoever was tracking her. Sleep came in 2-hour intervals in 24-hour diners and airport lounges. She changed her appearance subtly but effectively, different clothes, glasses instead of contacts, her hair styled differently each day. Most importantly, she stayed in crowds, reasoning that whoever was hunting her wouldn't risk exposure in public spaces. The plan was simple: get to Miami, where her college roommate Jessica Martinez now worked as a federal prosecutor. Jessica had connections in the Justice Department and the credibility to push Sarah's evidence up the chain of command. More importantly, Jessica was one of the few people Sarah trusted completely, someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Booking the flight had been a calculated risk. Using her real identity was dangerous, but creating fake documentation would have taken time she didn't have. Instead, Sarah had booked the ticket at the last minute, choosing a route with multiple stops. To make tracking more difficult, Denver to Miami with a layover in Houston. If anyone was monitoring passenger manifests, they have to move fast to intercept her. As Flight 847 prepared for takeoff, Sarah allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. In 4 hours she would land in Miami. In 6 hours she would be sitting across from Jessica, finally able to share the burden she'd been carrying. The evidence would be in the right hands, and the people responsible for this conspiracy would be brought to justice. She opened her laptop and began reviewing her presentation one more time, making sure every detail was perfect. The data was damning. Test results showing the vaccine's deliberate ineffectiveness, internal memos discussing population management strategies, and financial records linking Meridian to a network of offshore accounts controlled by individuals with ties to foreign governments. It painted a picture of corporate malfeasance on a scale that would shock the public and potentially destabilize the entire pharmaceutical industry. The passenger in seat 2B, a middle-aged man in expensive suit, glanced over at her screen with mild curiosity. Sarah quickly minimized the window, replacing it with a mundane PowerPoint about quarterly sales projections. Old habits from her years in corporate America died hard, and maintaining operational security had become second nature. Over the past 3 days, heading to Miami for business? The man asked with the practiced charm of someone accustomed to first-class small talk. Sarah nodded politely. Conference, she replied, keeping her answer brief but not unfriendly. You? Real estate development, he said, extending a manicured hand. Richard Hawthorne. Always opportunities in South Florida. Sarah, she replied, deliberately omitting her last name as she shook his hand briefly. His grip was firm, his smile practiced, and something about his eyes made her instinctively cautious. He seemed like exactly the type of successful businessman who would occupy seat 2B on a Tuesday morning flight. But Sarah had learned to trust her instincts about people. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Sarah felt her phone buzz with a text message. Unknown number. Her heart rate spiked as she read the words. We know you're on Flight 847. Land in Houston and walk away. This is your only warning. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she deleted the message and powered off her phone. They had found her. Somehow, despite all her precautions, they knew exactly where she was. The question now was whether they would try to stop the plane or wait until it landed. Either way, her simple plan to reach Miami safely had just become significantly more complicated. She glanced around the cabin with new eyes, wondering if any of the other passengers were involved in whatever conspiracy she had uncovered. The businessman beside her suddenly seemed less like a coincidence and more like a potential threat. The woman across the aisle who kept checking her phone could be a lookout. Even the flight attendants, with their professional smiles and efficient movements, might not be what they appeared to be. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their departure and expected arrival time in Houston. Sarah realized she had a choice to make: stay on the plane and risk whatever was waiting for her in Miami, or heed the warning and disappear into Houston's sprawling airport, abandoning her plan to reach Jessica and potentially allowing Meridian's conspiracy to continue unchecked. As Flight 847 lifted off into the clear Colorado morning, Sarah Chun made her decision. She would not be intimidated into silence. Whatever happened next, she would find a way to expose the truth, even if it meant putting herself in greater danger. The lives of millions of Americans depended on the information she carried, and she would not let fear or threats prevent her from doing what was right. She had no idea that in less than 2 hours, her secret would become the least of anyone's problems aboard Flight 847, and that the knowledge she'd been so desperately trying to protect would become the key to everyone's survival. The first sign of trouble came 30 minutes into the flight, when Captain Bradley Morrison felt the Boeing 777 shudder in a way that had nothing to do with atmospheric conditions. He exchanged glances with his co-pilot, Amanda Rodriguez, who was already scanning the instrument panel with practiced efficiency. "Engine pressure dropping on number 2, Rodriguez reported, her voice calm but edged with concern. "Still within normal parameters, but it's fluctuating." Morrison nodded, his 23 years of commercial aviation experience telling him that fluctuations rarely stayed within normal parameters for long. "Keep monitoring, run a diagnostic." In the cabin, most passengers barely noticed the subtle change in engine tone, but Sarah Chun felt it immediately. Her heightened state of awareness, sharpened by 3 days of constantly looking over her shoulder, made her sensitive to every variation in the aircraft's behavior. She glanced out the small window at the engine nacelle, watching for any visible signs of distress. Richard Hawthorne, the businessman in 2B, seemed oblivious to the mechanical concerns, absorbed in a phone call he'd managed to make before takeoff restrictions kicked in. Sarah caught fragments of his conversation, something about schedules being maintained and packages being delivered on time. His tone carried an authority that suggested he was accustomed to having his instructions followed without question. 3 rows behind Sarah, Dr. Michael Patterson was experiencing his own form of turbulence. The emergency medicine physician from Denver General had boarded Flight 847, expecting a quiet trip to a medical conference in Miami, but the text message he'd received just before takeoff had changed everything. His ex-wife's attorney was demanding an immediate response to custody modification papers, threatening to use his upcoming conference travel as evidence of parental neglect. Patterson stared at his phone, weighing his options. He could turn around at the Houston layover, fly back to Denver, and try to salvage his relationship with his 8-year-old daughter Emma, or he could continue to Miami, present his research on emergency trauma protocols, and hope his lawyer could handle the legal maneuvering in his absence. Either choice felt like a betrayal of someone he cared about. In the galley, flight attendant Maria Santos was dealing with a different kind of pressure. The head flight attendant, Janet Williams, had called in sick at the last minute, leaving Maria in charge of the first-class cabin, despite having only 18 months of experience with the airline. The passenger manifest showed several high-maintenance frequent flyers, including a technology executive known for his demanding behavior, and a retired judge who complained about everything from seat temperature to coffee strength. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maria had handled difficult passengers before, but never while juggling the additional responsibilities of supervising 2 junior flight attendants and managing the complex service protocols that first-class passengers expected. She was determined to prove herself capable of handling the promotion she'd been hoping for, even under less than ideal circumstances. The aircraft hit a pocket of genuine turbulence as they climbed through 28,000 feet, causing several passengers to look up from their devices with momentary concern. Sarah felt her laptop slide slightly on the tray table and instinctively reached out to steady it, her fingers brushing against the corner where she'd taped the encrypted drive containing Meridian's damaging secrets. In the cockpit, the engine pressure anomaly was becoming more pronounced. Rodriguez ran through the diagnostic checklist while Morrison contacted air traffic control to request permission for a slight course adjustment that would keep them closer to potential emergency landing sites. Denver Center, United 847 requesting Deviation to Victor 12 for smoother air, Morrison said into his headset, using standard phraseology that wouldn't alarm passengers if they happened to overhear. United 847, approved as requested. Maintain flight level 350. The course change was subtle, but it put them on a trajectory that would take them directly over several major airports, including Colorado Springs, Kansas City, and Little Rock. Morrison hoped it was just a precautionary measure, but his experience told him to prepare for multiple contingencies. Sarah noticed a slight change in direction and felt her anxiety spike. Any deviation from the planned route could indicate mechanical problems, weather issues, or something more sinister. She opened her laptop and pulled up a flight tracking application, watching as Flight 847's path showed a minor course correction. The change was small enough to be routine, but given the threat she'd received, Sarah couldn't afford to assume anything was routine. Richard Hawthorne finished his phone call and turned his attention to Sarah, apparently noticing her focused attention on the laptop screen. "Nervous, flyer?" he asked with what seemed like genuine concern. "Just keeping track of our progress," Sarah replied, closing the flight tracking application and switching to a document that looked like a standard business proposal. "Force of habit from too much business travel." "I understand completely," Hawthorne said. "I've probably flown over 1,000,000 miles in the past decade. After a while, you develop a sixth sense about these things." He paused, studying her profile. As she worked, "You know, you look familiar. Have we met at a conference or industry event?" Sarah's blood chilled. She was certain she'd never seen Hawthorne before, but his question felt less like polite conversation and more like fishing for information. "I don't think so," she said carefully. "I have one of those faces, I guess." Behind them, Dr. Patterson had made his decision about the custody situation and was composing a careful email to his lawyer when he noticed a commotion near the front of the cabin. Maria Santos was speaking in urgent, hushed tones with the other flight attendant, their body language suggesting something more serious than a service issue. Patterson's medical training had taught him to notice subtle signs of distress, and both flight attendants were exhibiting classic stress responses: rapid breathing, tense shoulders, frequent glances toward the cockpit door. He unbuckled his seatbelt and approached the galley area. "Excuse me," he said quietly to Maria. "I'm Dr. Patterson. Is there a medical emergency? I'm happy to help if needed." Maria looked relieved to see him. "Doctor, thank you. We have a passenger in coach who's experiencing what looks like severe food poisoning. She's been vomiting for the past 10 minutes, and she's becoming dehydrated. The captain wanted to know if we have any medical personnel on board." Patterson nodded. "I'll take a look." "Do you have a medical kit?" "Yes, sir, right here." Maria opened a secured cabinet and retrieved a comprehensive medical kit that airlines were required to carry for in-flight emergencies. As Patterson made his way toward the coach section, Sarah overheard enough of the conversation to understand that there was a sick passenger on board. Under normal circumstances, she wouldn't have given it much thought, but nothing about the past 3 days had been normal. She found herself wondering if the timing was coincidental or if someone was creating a diversion. In the cockpit, engine situation was deteriorating more rapidly than Morrison had expected. The pressure readings on engine number 2 were now clearly outside acceptable parameters, and warning lights were beginning to illuminate on the master caution panel. "Amanda, I think we need to start considering our options," Morrison said, his voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "How far out are we from Kansas City?" Rodriguez checked their position. "Approximately 40 minutes at current speed and altitude." "But Captain, if we need to shut down number 2, we'll need to descend and reduce speed significantly." Morrison weighed their options. A single-engine approach wasn't inherently dangerous in a Boeing 777, but it required careful planning and coordination with air traffic control. More importantly, it meant an unscheduled landing that would strand 300 passengers and potentially expose them to whatever threats might be waiting on the ground. Let's give it another few minutes, Morrison decided. Monitor everything closely. If the trend continues, we'll declare an emergency and divert to Kansas City. In the coach section, Dr. Patterson was examining the sick passenger, a woman in her 30s who had indeed been experiencing severe gastrointestinal distress. But as he took her vital signs and asked about her symptoms, Patterson began to suspect that this wasn't food poisoning. "Ma'am, I need you to think carefully," he said gently. "Before you got sick, did you notice anything unusual? Any strange tastes, unusual fatigue, or dizziness that seemed to come on suddenly?" The woman, whose name was Linda Foster, struggled to focus on his questions. I had coffee about an hour ago, from the service cart. It tasted a little bitter, but I thought maybe it was just strong." Patterson felt a cold knot form in his stomach. In his years working emergency medicine, he'd seen enough cases of intentional poisoning to recognize the signs. Linda's symptoms, combined with the rapid onset and the fact that she was the only passenger affected, suggested something far more serious than food poisoning. He made his way back to the front of the plane, where Maria Santos was waiting anxiously for his assessment. "I need to speak with the captain immediately," Patterson told her. "This isn't food poisoning." Sarah, who had been listening carefully to the hushed conversations around her, felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind. A sick passenger, an engine problem, a businessman who seemed unusually interested in her identity, a threatening text message. None of these things might be connected, but her experience with corporate espionage had taught her that coincidences were often anything but coincidental. She opened her laptop again and began typing what looked like meeting notes but was actually a detailed log of everything she'd observed since boarding the flight. If something was happening aboard Flight 847, she wanted a record of every detail that might later prove important. Richard Hawthorne watched her typing with increasing interest. "You're very focused on your work," he commented. "Must be an important presentation." "Just trying to stay ahead of things," Sarah replied without looking up from her screen. "You know how it is in consulting, always another deadline." But even as she spoke, Sarah was becoming convinced that Richard Hawthorne was not who he claimed to be. His questions felt too probing, his interest too persistent, and his presence in the seat next to hers was starting to feel less like coincidence and more like deliberate positioning. In the cockpit, Captain Morrison made the decision that would change everything for Flight 847's 300 passengers. Engine number 2 was failing, and they could no longer safely continue to their destination. "Denver Center United 847 declaring an emergency," Morrison said into his radio. "We have an engine failure and are requesting immediate diversion to the nearest suitable airport." The words, "declaring an emergency," sent a ripple of concern through the cabin as passengers who understood aviation terminology realized their routine flight had just become something else entirely. Sarah Chun closed her laptop and gripped her armrest, knowing that whatever plan she'd had for reaching Miami safely was about to change dramatically. What none of them knew was that the engine failure was just the beginning, and that the real crisis aboard Flight 847 was still unfolding in ways that would test everyone's limits and reveal secrets that some people were willing to kill to protect. The announcement came over the intercom with the kind of practiced calm that airline crews train for, but hope never to use. Captain Morrison's voice carried across the cabin with professional authority, but those who knew what to listen for could hear the underlying tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've encountered a minor mechanical issue that requires us to make an unscheduled landing in Kansas City for maintenance. We'll be descending shortly, and flight attendants will be coming through to prepare the cabin for landing. We expect to be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. The word minor did little to ease the anxiety that rippled through the passenger compartment. Experienced travelers knew that captains didn't divert flights for truly minor issues, and the sudden change in engine noise was becoming noticeable even to those who normally paid no attention to such things. Sarah Chun felt her stomach drop, and not from the aircraft's descent. An emergency landing meant delay, investigation, and exposure, exactly what she couldn't afford. Worse, it meant being trapped in an airport where whoever had sent that threatening text message could easily track her down. She glanced at Richard Hawthorne, who seemed remarkably calm for someone whose travel plans had just been disrupted. "Well, this is inconvenient," Hawthorne said, checking his expensive watch. "I suppose my meetings will have to be rescheduled." He paused, studying Sarah's obvious distress. "You seem more concerned than most." "An important appointment in Miami?" Sarah forced herself to appear composed. "Just hoping the delay isn't too long. You know how these things can cascade into missed connections and canceled meetings." But internally, she was calculating options. Kansas City Airport was large enough to get lost in, but it also meant security cameras, passenger manifests, and limited exits. If someone was tracking her, this delay had just made their job significantly easier. In the coach section, Dr. Patterson was monitoring Linda Foster's condition while trying to process the implications of what he'd observed. Her symptoms were consistent with deliberate poisoning, but the method of delivery suggested something sophisticated and targeted. The bitter coffee she'd mentioned could have been doctored, but that would require access to the beverage service and knowledge of which passenger to target. More troubling was the timing. The poisoning had occurred roughly 30 minutes into the flight, just as the engine problems began manifesting. Patterson's analytical mind, honed by years of emergency medicine, struggled to accept that these incidents were unrelated. Someone had wanted this flight diverted, and they'd been willing to poison an innocent passenger to create a medical emergency as cover. "Dr. Patterson?" Maria Santos approached him with barely controlled anxiety. "The captain wants to speak with you. Something about the passenger's condition." Patterson followed Maria to the front of the aircraft, where Captain Morrison had emerged from the cockpit. The captain's face was grim, his usual professional demeanor strained by the multiple crises unfolding simultaneously. "Doctor, I understand. You believe our passenger may have been deliberately poisoned," Morrison said quietly, keeping his voice low to avoid alarming nearby passengers. "I need to know how certain you are about that assessment." Patterson chose his words carefully. "Based on the symptom presentation and the rapid onset, I'd say there's a high probability this wasn't accidental food poisoning. The timing concerns me, especially combined with your mechanical issues." Morrison nodded grimly. "That's what I was afraid of. We're dealing with more than just an engine failure here. I've been in contact with air traffic control, and there are some irregularities in our flight plan that weren't there when we took off." "What kind of irregularities?" "Someone with high-level access modified our route authorization after departure. The changes were subtle enough to avoid immediate detection, but they would have taken us over some very specific geographic coordinates. Coordinates that don't make sense for a standard Denver to Miami flight." The implications hit Patterson immediately. "You think someone wanted us to fly over specific locations?" "I think someone wanted control of where this aircraft went, and when that plan was disrupted by our emergency diversion, they activated a backup plan involving your poisoned passenger." Morrison paused, glancing toward the first-class cabin. "Doctor, I need to ask you something that might sound paranoid, but given the circumstances, I have to consider all possibilities. Have you noticed anything unusual about any of the passengers? Anyone who seemed out of place or overly interested in the flight details?" Patterson followed the captain's gaze toward the front of the cabin, where he could see Sarah Chun's tense posture and Richard Hawthorne's casual demeanor. Something about the dynamic between them had been bothering him since he'd first walked through first class to examine Linda Foster. The businessman in 2B has been asking a lot of questions about the woman next to him, Patterson said. More than normal passenger small talk would warrant. And she seems genuinely frightened about something beyond the emergency landing. Morrison absorbed this information with the kind of quick decision-making that had kept him accident-free through 2 decades of commercial aviation. I'm going to need you to do something for me, Doctor. I want you to go back and observe both of them carefully. If either one does anything suspicious, anything at all, I need to know immediately. Meanwhile, in the Kansas City Air Traffic Control Tower, Supervisor Janet Rodriguez was dealing with her own crisis. United Flight 847's emergency declaration had triggered standard protocols, but the additional information coming through federal channels was anything but standard. The FBI had contacted the tower directly, requesting immediate notification when the aircraft landed and demanding that all passengers be detained for questioning. The federal agent who'd made the call, Special Agent Lisa Thompson, had been cryptic about the details but emphatic about the urgency. We have credible intelligence that Flight 847 is carrying a passenger who poses a significant threat to national security, Thompson had said. Under no circumstances should anyone be allowed to leave that aircraft until we've had a chance to identify and apprehend the individual in question. Rodriguez had handled hundreds of emergency landings during her 15-year career, but she'd never had the FBI waiting on the tarmac before. Whatever was happening aboard United 847 was clearly bigger than a simple mechanical failure. Back on the aircraft, Sarah Chun was making calculations of her own. The descent into Kansas City had given her time to think, and she was beginning to suspect that the emergency landing might not be as coincidental as it appeared. Someone had wanted this plane on the ground, and the engine failure provided the perfect cover for what was essentially a forced diversion. She opened her laptop. 1. More time and quickly accessed a secure email account she'd set up during her first day on the run. If she was about to be caught, she needed to get her evidence to someone who could act on it. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she composed a message to Jessica Martinez, attaching the encrypted files containing Meridian Pharmaceuticals' damaging secrets. "Having trouble with your presentation?" Richard Hawthorne asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp as he watched her urgent typing. "Just sending a quick update to my team," Sarah replied, hitting the send button just as the aircraft banked into its final approach to Kansas City International Airport. "Making sure they know about the delay." But Hawthorne's expression had changed. The pleasant businessman facade was slipping, revealing something harder and more calculating underneath. "Sarah Chun," he said quietly, using her full name for the first time. "Microbiologist, Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Currently carrying stolen company data on an encrypted drive." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She'd been right to be suspicious, but the confirmation still hit her like a physical blow. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Hawthorne's voice remained conversational, but there was steel beneath the politeness. "The question is whether you're going to make this easy or difficult. My employers would prefer easy, but they're prepared for either option." In that moment, Sarah understood that her 3-day flight from Colorado had been orchestrated from the beginning. They hadn't been chasing her, they'd been hurting her. The ransacked apartment, the blocked communications, even the threatening text message had all been designed to push her toward this specific flight, this specific seat next to this specific man. "The engine failure," she said, realization dawning. "You arranged that too." Hawthorne smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "Let's just say that certain mechanical components can be encouraged to fail at convenient times. The poisoned passenger was insurance, in case the engine problem wasn't enough to force a diversion." Dr. Patterson, who had been making his way back through the cabin on Captain Morrison's instructions, overheard enough of this conversation to understand that his suspicions had been dramatically understated. The woman in 2A wasn't just frightened. She was being actively threatened by the man sitting next to her. And if Hawthorne was responsible for both the engine failure and Linda Foster's poisoning, then everyone on Flight 847 was in far more danger than they realized. Patterson caught Sarah's eye and nodded slightly, hoping she would understand that help was coming. Then he quickly made his way back to the front of the aircraft to alert Captain Morrison that their emergency landing was about to become something much more serious. "Captain," Patterson said urgently, "the passenger in 2B just admitted to sabotaging the engine and poisoning Linda Foster. The woman in 2A appears to be his target, and I don't think he plans to wait until we land to make his move." Morrison felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. The modified flight plan, the engine failure, the poisoned passenger, and now a passenger threatening another passenger. Someone had turned his aircraft into a trap, and 300 innocent people were caught in the middle. "Get on the radio to Kansas City immediately," Morrison told his co-pilot. "Tell them we have a hostile passenger situation and we need law enforcement standing by. Then get me FBI Special Agent Thompson on the emergency frequency." As Flight 847 began its final descent into Kansas City, the various threads of conspiracy and crisis that had been building throughout the flight were about to converge into something that would test everyone aboard. Sarah Chun's secret was no longer just about corporate malfeasance. It had become the center of a web of deception that reached far higher than she had ever imagined. And in the cargo hold below, where passengers' luggage was stored in neat rows, a device that Richard Hawthorne had placed in his checked baggage was counting down toward zero, its digital display showing exactly 18 minutes and 37 seconds remaining. Special Agent Lisa Thompson stood on the tarmac at Kansas City International Airport, watching United Flight 847 make its approach through gray afternoon clouds. Her earpiece crackled with updates from the control tower, each transmission adding another layer of complexity to what had started as a routine apprehension operation. "Agent Thompson, we're getting reports of a hostile passenger situation aboard the aircraft," came the voice of Air Traffic Controller Janet Rodriguez. "Captain Morrison is requesting an immediate federal backup and bomb disposal unit." Thompson felt her stomach drop. "Did you say bomb disposal?" "Affirmative. The captain believes there may be an explosive device in the cargo hold. He's requesting priority landing and immediate evacuation protocols." Everything Thompson thought she knew about this mission was suddenly inadequate. She'd been told to apprehend Dr. Sarah Chun for corporate espionage and theft of proprietary information. Nobody had mentioned bombs, sabotage, or threats to passenger safety. She grabbed her radio and contacted FBI headquarters in Washington. "This is Thompson in Kansas City. The situation aboard Flight 847 has escalated beyond the original parameters. I need a full tactical team and bomb disposal unit immediately. And I need someone to explain to me why a simple corporate espionage case has turned into a potential terrorist incident." The response from Washington was swift and alarming. "Thompson, new intelligence indicates this is no longer about stolen pharmaceutical data. Dr. Chen may have uncovered something that threatens national security on multiple levels. Treat this as a code red situation and be prepared for anything." Inside the aircraft, Sarah Chun was experiencing her own moment of terrible clarity. Richard Hawthorne's revelation had stripped away her last illusions about the scope of the conspiracy she'd uncovered. This wasn't just about Meridian Pharmaceuticals cutting corners on vaccine development. It was about something much larger and more dangerous. "You want to know what you really stumbled onto at Meridian?" Hawthorne said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper as the aircraft continued its descent. "Your precious vaccine research was just one piece of a much bigger operation. Those offshore accounts you traced, they don't belong to greedy executives. They belong to a network of individuals who have been systematically compromising American Pharmaceutical infrastructure for the past 5 years. Sarah felt sick, but not from the aircraft's motion. Foreign agents? Among others. The goal was never just to make money from ineffective vaccines. It was to create a situation where the American public would lose faith in their own medical system, making them vulnerable to alternatives controlled by our competitors. Hawthorne smiled coldly. Your vaccine wasn't just ineffective. It was designed to cause specific side effects that would mirror symptoms of bioweapons that don't officially exist. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Hawthorne was telling the truth, then Meridian wasn't just guilty of corporate malfeasance. They were part of a coordinated attack on American public health infrastructure. The evidence she'd been carrying wasn't just about one company's crimes. It was proof of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and industry. The device in the cargo hold, Sarah said, understanding flooding over her. You're not just trying to silence me. You're trying to destroy the evidence. Very good, Dr. Chun. Though I'm afraid the situation is slightly more complex than that. Hawthorne checked his watch with casual precision. The explosion is timed to occur precisely when this aircraft would have been over the coordinates in our original flight plan. Coordinates that correspond to a highly classified military installation that your government doesn't want anyone to know exists. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. You're going to frame this as a terrorist attack. Make it look like someone targeted the military facility. Among other things, yes. The beauty of the plan is its simplicity. Dr. Sarah Chun, disgruntled scientist with a history of mental instability, steals sensitive data from her employer, then attempts to expose state secrets by attacking a military target. When the attack fails due to an emergency landing, she dies along with everyone else in what appears to be a desperate suicide bombing. Mental instability? Sarah had to fight to keep her voice level. Oh, didn't you know? Your medical records were updated yesterday to reflect a recent psychiatric evaluation, recommending immediate intervention for paranoid delusions and violent tendencies. Amazing how quickly digital records can be modified when you have the right access codes. Dr. Patterson had been listening to this conversation from his position near the galley, and every word made him more certain that the situation aboard Flight 847 was far beyond anything he'd encountered in emergency medicine. The scope of the conspiracy Hawthorne was describing suggested resources and planning that went far beyond corporate crime. He caught the attention of Maria Santos, who was struggling to maintain normal service protocols while dealing with the multiple crises unfolding around her. Maria, I need you to get a message to the captain immediately. Tell him the passenger in 2B has just confessed to planning a bombing that's designed to look like a terrorist attack on a military installation. Maria's eyes widened, but her professional training kicked in. She made her way quickly toward the cockpit, where Captain Morrison was coordinating with air traffic control for the emergency landing while trying to process the flood of information coming from multiple sources. Captain, Maria said urgently, Dr. Patterson says the passenger in 2B has confessed to planning a bombing designed to look like a terrorist attack. Morrison felt the situation crystallize into sharp focus. Get me Agent Thompson on the emergency frequency immediately, he told his co-pilot, and start emergency descent procedures. I want us on the ground in the next 8 minutes, no matter what it takes. The radio crackled to life with Agent Thompson's voice. Flight 847, this is FBI Special Agent Thompson. We have the airport secured and tactical teams standing by. What is your current assessment of the threat level? Agent Thompson, we have a passenger who has confessed to sabotaging this aircraft and planting an explosive device in the cargo hold, Morrison replied. He claims the bombing is designed to frame another passenger for a terrorist attack on a military installation. I need bomb disposal on the tarmac immediately. Thompson's voice remained steady despite the gravity of the information. Copy that. Flight 847. Bomb disposal is already en route. Can you give me any information about the device? Timer, trigger mechanism, estimated yield? Morrison looked toward the first-class cabin, where he could see Dr. Patterson attempting to get closer to Hawthorne without arousing suspicion. Stand by, Agent Thompson. We're trying to gather more intelligence on the device specifics. Patterson had positioned himself where he could overhear Hawthorne's continuing conversation with Sarah, but what he heard made him realize that time was running out faster than anyone had calculated. The timer was set based on our original flight plan, Hawthorne was saying. Since we've been diverted, the explosion will occur while we're still airborne, approximately 6 minutes after touchdown. More than enough time to get the aircraft to the terminal, where the blast radius will include the passenger areas. Sarah felt desperation rising in her chest. Hundreds of innocent people will die. Sacrifices are necessary for larger goals. Hawthorne replied with chilling indifference. Though I should mention that you have one option. The device can be disarmed, but only with the proper authorization codes. Codes that I happen to possess. What do you want? The encrypted drive. Obviously. And your cooperation in a brief video statement that will be discovered after the explosion, in which you confess to the terrorist plot and explain your motivations for attacking American interests. Patterson had heard enough. He quickly made his way back to the galley and grabbed the intercom handset, keying it to broadcast throughout the aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Michael Patterson speaking. I'm an emergency medicine physician, and I need everyone to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. There is an explosive device aboard this aircraft that is set to detonate in approximately 15 minutes. The individual responsible is sitting in seat 2B, and he is currently threatening the passenger in seat 2A. The announcement sent a shock wave through the cabin. Passengers who had been quietly anxious about the emergency landing suddenly understood they were facing something far more serious. But instead of panic, Patterson's authoritative tone and medical credentials seemed to instill a sense of organized urgency. I need every passenger to immediately prepare for emergency evacuation procedures, Patterson continued. Flight attendants, please begin prepping the emergency slides. Those of you in window seats, familiarize yourselves with emergency exit procedures. We will be landing in Kansas City in approximately 4 minutes, and we need to evacuate this aircraft as quickly and safely as possible. Richard Hawthorne's carefully constructed plan had suddenly become much more complicated. With his identity and intentions now known to everyone aboard, his leverage over Sarah Chun was significantly reduced. More importantly, the passengers were now aware of the threat and preparing to evacuate, which would limit the casualties from his explosive device. Dr. Patterson has complicated things unnecessarily, Hawthorne said to Sarah, his composure finally beginning to crack. But it doesn't change the fundamental equation. I still have the disarm codes, and you still have something I need. Sarah looked around the cabin, where passengers were following Patterson's instructions with remarkable calm and efficiency. Flight attendants were preparing emergency equipment, parents were securing their children, and everyone was working together toward the common goal of survival. You're wrong about the equation, Sarah said quietly. You're assuming I'm willing to save myself at the expense of everyone else. But that's not who I am. She opened her laptop one final time and began typing rapidly, uploading her encrypted files to multiple cloud storage locations and sending access codes to journalists, federal agencies, and watchdog organizations around the world. If she was going to die in the next few minutes, she was going to make sure that Meridian Pharmaceuticals' conspiracy died with her. What are you doing? Hawthorne demanded, reaching for her laptop. Making sure your employer's plan fails completely, Sarah replied, hitting the final send button just as Flight 847's wheels touched down on the Kansas City runway. Even if you blow up this plane, the evidence is already out there. Your conspiracy is finished. As the aircraft rolled toward the terminal, emergency vehicles racing alongside it, with lights and sirens blaring. The final phase of the crisis aboard Flight 847 was about to begin. Sarah Chun's secret had indeed saved everyone's life, but not in the way anyone could have predicted. The Boeing 777 came to a stop 300 yards from the terminal, surrounded by a perimeter of emergency vehicles that looked like a small army. Fire trucks, ambulances, FBI tactical units, and bomb disposal experts had transformed the normally quiet Tuesday afternoon tarmac into a scene from a disaster movie. Inside the aircraft, the evacuation was proceeding with remarkable efficiency. Flight attendant Maria Santos had managed to get the emergency slides deployed despite her limited experience, and passengers were moving toward the exits in organized groups rather than the panicked rush that everyone had feared. Dr. Patterson's calm announcement had somehow transformed 300 potential victims into a coordinated team focused on survival. But in first class, the standoff between Sarah Chun and Richard Hawthorne had entered its most dangerous phase. "You think you've won something by uploading those files," Hawthorne said, his businessman facade completely abandoned, now in favor of something cold and mechanical. "But you don't understand the scope of what you're interfering with. Those pharmaceutical records were just the beginning. The real operation involves infrastructure you can't even imagine." Sarah kept her hands steady on her laptop keyboard, continuing to send copies of her evidence to every secure server and trusted contact she could access. "Then explain it to me. If I'm going to die anyway, at least let me understand what I stumbled into." Agent Thompson's voice crackled over the aircraft's communication system. "Flight 847, this is Agent Thompson. We have bomb disposal experts on site, but we need more information about the device. Can you provide specifics on location, timer mechanism, or disarm procedures?" Captain Morrison looked toward the first-class cabin, where he could see Hawthorne and Sarah still engaged in their tense conversation. "Agent Thompson, the suspect, claims to have disarm codes, but he's using them as leverage. We need to evacuate the passengers first, then deal with the device." "Negative. Flight 847. Our experts estimate that moving the aircraft or attempting to access the cargo hold could trigger a motion-sensitive backup detonator. We need those disarm codes immediately." Dr. Patterson, who had been helping coordinate the passenger evacuation, overheard this exchange and realized that the situation had become a complex negotiation rather than a simple rescue operation. The passengers needed to get off the aircraft, but any attempt to move them quickly could set off the bomb prematurely. He made his way back to first class, where Hawthorne and Sarah were still locked in their deadly conversation. As he approached, he could hear Hawthorne outlining the true scope of the conspiracy that Sarah had uncovered. Meridian Pharmaceuticals was just one node in a network of compromised companies, Hawthorne was saying. Food production, water treatment, telecommunications, transportation infrastructure, all of it gradually being positioned for coordinated failure at a predetermined time. Sarah felt her understanding of the threat expanding exponentially. A coordinated attack on multiple infrastructure systems simultaneously. More than that, a complete replacement of American infrastructure with alternatives controlled by our partners. When the old systems fail, new ones will be ready to take their place. Systems that will function perfectly, but with built-in dependencies that ensure long-term strategic control. Dr. Patterson stepped into their conversation with the authority that had served him well in emergency situations. "Mr. Hawthorne, I'm Dr. Patterson. I've been listening to your conversation, and I think there's something you haven't considered." Hawthorne turned toward him with irritation. "Doctor, this doesn't concern you. Actually, it does. You see, I've been thinking about the timing of your operation, and I believe you've made a critical error in your calculations." "What kind of error?" Patterson pulled out his phone and showed Hawthorne the screen, which displayed a news alert he'd received moments earlier. Approximately 30 minutes ago, major news outlets began reporting on leaked pharmaceutical documents that expose a conspiracy involving Meridian Pharmaceuticals and several other companies. The source appears to be Dr. Chen's uploaded files. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Her desperate last-minute uploads had worked faster than she dared to expect. The evidence was already in the hands of journalists and investigators around the world. Hawthorne's composure finally cracked completely. That's impossible. The files were encrypted. Apparently not well enough, Patterson continued. According to this report, the FBI has already begun coordinating with multiple agencies to investigate the companies named in the documents. Your infrastructure operation has been exposed before it could be implemented. Agent Thompson's voice came over the radio again, this time with urgency that suggested the situation on the ground was escalating. Flight 847. We're getting reports that the leaked documents have triggered federal investigations at multiple locations across the country. We need to resolve the situation aboard your aircraft immediately, as other elements of this conspiracy may be attempting to activate backup plans. Captain Morrison made the decision that would define the final moments of the crisis. Mr. Hawthorne, this is Captain Morrison speaking. Your operation has failed. The evidence is public. The conspirators are being arrested, and your explosive device is the only remaining threat to innocent lives. I'm asking you to provide the disarm codes voluntarily. Hawthorne looked around the first-class cabin, where the last few passengers were making their way toward the emergency exits. The orderly evacuation, the failed conspiracy, and the exposure of the infrastructure plot had stripped away every advantage he'd counted on. But he still had one card left to play. The disarm codes require biometric authentication, he said finally. My fingerprint and voice recognition. Even if I gave you the codes, they wouldn't work without my physical presence at the device. Sarah understood immediately. You're saying you need to go to the cargo hold personally. That's exactly what I'm saying. And I'm not going alone. Hawthorne's eyes fixed on Sarah with renewed intensity. Dr. Chun comes with me, or the device detonates when the timer reaches 0 in approximately 8 minutes. Agent Thompson had been monitoring the conversation through the aircraft's communication system, and her response was immediate. Absolutely not. We do not negotiate with terrorists, and we do not put civilians at additional risk. But Dr. Patterson had been thinking through the medical implications of the situation, and he had a different perspective. Agent Thompson, if Mr. Hawthorne is telling the truth about the biometric authentication, then he's the only person who can disarm the device. The question is whether we can ensure Dr. Chun's safety during the process. Maria Santos, who had finished helping with the passenger evacuation, rejoined the conversation with information that changed the dynamic once again. Dr. Patterson, I've been talking to our maintenance crew chief via radio. He says the cargo hold access can be monitored by security cameras, and the bomb disposal experts have equipment that can provide real-time assessment of any device we encounter. Captain Morrison saw an opportunity to regain control of the situation. Mr. Hawthorne, here's what's going to happen. You and Dr. Chun will be escorted to the cargo hold by armed federal agents. The disarm procedure will be monitored by bomb disposal experts who can intervene if you attempt any deception. Dr. Chen will be protected throughout the process, and you will be taken into custody immediately afterward. And if I refuse, then we evacuate the aircraft to maximum safe distance and let the device detonate. Your operation has already failed, your conspirators are being arrested, and the evidence is public. The only question now is whether you're going to be responsible for the deaths of innocent people. Hawthorne was quiet for nearly a minute, calculating options that were rapidly diminishing. Finally he nodded. I'll disarm the device. But I want assurances that Dr. Chun and I will both survive the process. Agent Thompson's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. Mr. Hawthorne, The only assurance I can give you is that if you cooperate fully and disarm the device without any attempts at deception, you'll live long enough to face trial for terrorism, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Dr. Chun will be protected throughout the process and released unharmed afterward. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror as she realized that her 3-day nightmare was finally approaching its end. But she also understood that the next few minutes would be the most dangerous of all. Everything depended on whether Richard Hawthorne could be trusted to honor his agreement, or whether he had one final surprise waiting in the cargo hold. Dr. Chun, Agent Thompson continued, I need you to understand that this is voluntary on your part. You don't have to accompany Mr. Hawthorne to the cargo hold. Our experts believe they may be able to work around biometric authentication if necessary. Sarah looked around the now empty first-class cabin, thinking about the 300 passengers who had safely evacuated, the evidence that was already exposing the conspiracy, and the potential for this crisis to finally end without additional casualties. I'll go, she said quietly. If my presence increases the chances of disarming the device safely, then I'll go. Dr. Patterson felt compelled to add his professional assessment. Agent Thompson, I recommend that we proceed immediately. Every minute we delay increases the psychological pressure on Mr. Hawthorne and the risk that he might change his mind or attempt something desperate. As federal agents boarded the aircraft to escort Sarah and Hawthorne to the cargo hold, the final phase of the crisis aboard Flight 847 was about to begin. Sarah Chun's secret had indeed saved everyone's life by exposing a conspiracy that reached far beyond anything she had initially imagined. But whether she would survive to see the full consequences of her courage remained to be determined in the darkness of the cargo hold, where a device designed to destroy evidence and frame an innocent woman was counting down its final minutes. The cargo hold of a Boeing 777 was not designed for human occupancy. As Sarah Chun descended the narrow maintenance ladder behind Richard Hawthorne, followed closely by FBI bomb disposal expert Captain Derek Walsh, she felt the claustrophobic weight of the aircraft's belly pressing down on her. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across rows of luggage containers, creating a maze of potential hiding spots for an explosive device. The device is in Container 14C, Hawthorne said, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Approximately 30 feet forward and to your left. Captain Walsh, a 20-year veteran of explosive ordnance disposal, swept his flashlight beam across the cargo area while monitoring readings on a handheld detection device. I'm picking up electronic signatures consistent with a timing mechanism, he reported into his radio headset. Moving to investigate. Above them, in the aircraft's passenger cabin, Agent Thompson coordinated with multiple law enforcement agencies as reports poured in from across the country. The documents Sarah had uploaded were creating a cascading effect of investigations and arrests that was dismantling the infrastructure conspiracy in real time. Agent Thompson, this is Director Harrison at FBI headquarters, came the voice through her earpiece. The scope of this operation is beyond anything we initially suspected. We have simultaneous raids occurring at 17 facilities across 8 states. Meridian Pharmaceuticals was apparently just the tip of the iceberg. Thompson kept one eye on the monitor showing the cargo hold camera feed while processing the incoming intelligence. What are we looking at in terms of overall impact, Director? If Dr. Chun's evidence is accurate, and preliminary analysis suggests it is, we're dealing with a coordinated effort to compromise critical infrastructure across multiple sectors. Water treatment facilities, power grids, transportation networks, communication systems, all of it was being systematically positioned for coordinated failure. In the cargo hold, Captain Walsh had located the device exactly where Hawthorne had indicated. It was smaller than expected, roughly the size of a briefcase, but the sophisticated electronics, visible through its partially transparent casing, suggested capabilities far beyond a simple explosive device. "This isn't just a bomb," Walsh reported to his team above. "I'm seeing components consistent with an electromagnetic pulse generator, chemical dispersal system, and what appears to be a data transmission array. This device was designed to do multiple types of damage simultaneously." Sarah felt her scientific curiosity override her fear as she examined the device from a safe distance. "It's designed to simulate multiple attack vectors," she said, understanding flooding through her. "Chemical, biological, electromagnetic, and explosive." When it detonated over that military installation, investigators would have found evidence of several different types of weapons. Hawthorne nodded grimly. The goal was to create confusion about the source and method of attack. Multiple signatures would have suggested a sophisticated terrorist cell with access to various types of weapons technology, which would have justified an extreme response, Walsh added, his hands working carefully around the device's casing. "Mr. Hawthorne, I need you to begin the disarm sequence now. My readings show approximately 4 minutes and 20 seconds remaining on the timer." Hawthorne approached the device and placed his hand on a biometric scanner that glowed softly in the dim cargo hold lighting. The scanner beeped once, then prompted for voice authentication. "Authorization code Omega-7-7-Delta, Hawthorne said clearly. "Principal Agent Hawthorne, Richard James. Mission abort protocol activated." The device's display changed from a countdown timer to a series of scrolling diagnostic messages. Walsh monitored his detection equipment carefully, watching for any signs that the disarm procedure might be a deception designed to trigger premature detonation. "Electromagnetic signature is diminishing," Walsh reported. "Chemical components appear to be neutralizing, but I'm still showing active electronic systems." "The data transmission array," Sarah said suddenly. "It's still active. It's sending information somewhere." Hawthorne's expression shifted subtly, revealing something that might have been satisfaction or regret. "Insurance policy," he said quietly. "Even if the operation failed, the data collected during this mission would be valuable for future planning." "What kind of data?" Agent Thompson's voice came through Walsh's radio, sharp with concern. "Passenger behavior during crisis situations, response times for federal agencies, communication protocols between air traffic control and law enforcement, details about airport security procedures and emergency response capabilities." Hawthorne paused, looking directly at Sarah. "And everything Dr. Chun knows about pharmaceutical security protocols and federal investigation procedures." Sarah realized with growing horror that even in failure, Hawthorne's mission was collecting intelligence that could be used to improve future operations. "You've been recording everything. Every conversation, every response, every detail about how the investigation unfolded." "Among other things, yes. The biometric authentication system doesn't just verify identity. It uploads real-time mission data to secure servers for analysis." Hawthorne's voice carried a note of professional pride despite the circumstances. "This operation may have failed, but the intelligence gathered will inform more successful future efforts." Captain Walsh had been working to trace the transmission signals while monitoring the disarm procedure. "Agent Thompson, we have a problem. The device is still actively transmitting, and I'm detecting multiple uplink frequencies. This isn't just sending data to one location. It's broadcasting to several simultaneous recipients." Agent Thompson's response was immediate and decisive. "Can you block the transmissions?" "Working on it, but the transmission array has hardened components designed to resist interference. I need more time to disable it completely." Above them in the passenger cabin, Dr. Patterson had been monitoring the situation through Agent Thompson's radio communications. His medical training had taught him to think systematically about complex problems, and something about the pattern of Hawthorne's revelations was bothering him. "Agent Thompson," Patterson said, approaching her position near the cargo hold access. I think there's something we're missing about Mr. Hawthorne's cooperation. What do you mean, Doctor? He's been very forthcoming about the device's capabilities and the intelligence gathering, but he hasn't explained why he's cooperating at all. His operation has failed, his conspirators are being arrested, and he's facing life in prison. What does he gain by helping us? Thompson felt a chill of recognition. In her 15 years with the FBI, she'd learned that when suspects became suddenly cooperative, it was often because they had one final card to play. In the cargo hold, Sarah was having similar thoughts as she watched Hawthorne work through the disarm sequence with what seemed like genuine professionalism. "Richard," she said, using his first name deliberately, "what aren't you telling us?" Hawthorne paused in his work and looked at her with something that might have been respect. "You're very perceptive. Dr. Chun, you're right that there's one final element to the situation that I haven't mentioned." Captain Walsh tensed, his hands freezing over the device components he'd been examining. "What kind of element?" "The biometric authentication system that disarmed the explosive components also activated a secondary protocol. In approximately 90 seconds, this device will release an aerosolized compound into the aircraft's ventilation system." Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. "What kind of compound?" "Nothing immediately fatal. A mild sedative combined with a memory-affecting agent. Everyone aboard this aircraft will experience significant gaps in their recollection of the past 6 hours. The official record will show a routine emergency landing due to mechanical failure, and any inconsistencies in passenger testimonies will be attributed to the stress of the experience." Agent Thompson's voice crackled through the radio with barely controlled fury. "You're telling us that even after disarming the bomb, you're still going to drug everyone aboard this aircraft?" "I'm telling you that the mission parameters included provisions for operational security regardless of primary objective success or failure. The intelligence gathered today is too valuable to lose, and loose ends create unnecessary complications for future operations." Captain Walsh was already working frantically to locate and disable the chemical dispersal system. "I need emergency ventilation protocols activated immediately. Shut down all air circulation to this aircraft, and bring in portable breathing apparatus for everyone in the cargo hold." Dr. Patterson, listening to this exchange from above, felt his medical instincts kick into high gear. "Agent Thompson, if that compound enters the ventilation system, everyone who is aboard this aircraft becomes a potential security risk. We need to evacuate all personnel immediately and seal the aircraft." But Sarah Chun had been thinking about the problem from a different angle. Her experience with pharmaceutical research had given her insight into the chemistry of memory-affecting compounds, and she had an idea that might neutralize Hawthorne's final gambit. "Captain Walsh," she said urgently, "the compound he's talking about requires specific atmospheric conditions to remain stable. If we can change the temperature and humidity in the cargo hold rapidly enough, we might be able to neutralize it before it can be dispersed." "How do we do that?" "Emergency fire suppression system. If we can trigger the cargo hold's fire suppression, the rapid temperature change and chemical interaction should destabilize most aerosolized compounds." Walsh looked at his detection equipment, then at the device, then at Sarah. "That's a significant risk. Fire suppression systems in cargo holds can be dangerous for anyone inside the space. More dangerous than memory-affecting drugs being dispersed to everyone who is aboard this aircraft." Sarah asked. Agent Thompson made the decision that would end the crisis aboard Flight 847. "Do it. Trigger the fire suppression system. Everyone needs to get to the access ladder immediately," Walsh ordered. "Fire suppression activation in 10 seconds." As Sarah climbed rapidly toward the passenger cabin, she could hear Hawthorne behind her, no longer attempting to maintain his cover of cooperation. "You're making a mistake, Dr. Chun. This operation was bigger than you can imagine, and stopping it here won't prevent what's coming." "Maybe not," Sarah called back. pulling herself up into the cabin as warning alarms began sounding throughout the aircraft. But at least people will know the truth about what you tried to do. The fire suppression system activated with a rush of chemical foam and rapidly dropping temperature. In the cargo hold below, electronic systems failed one by one as the environmental conditions shifted beyond their operational parameters. Hawthorne's final gambit had been neutralized by Sarah's quick thinking and Captain Walsh's expertise. As federal agents took Richard Hawthorne into custody and emergency crews ensured that the aircraft was safe for investigation, Sarah Chun finally allowed herself to believe that her 3-day nightmare was truly over. The evidence she'd carried had exposed a conspiracy that reached far beyond what she'd initially imagined, and her courage in the face of overwhelming danger had prevented a catastrophe that could have destabilized American infrastructure for decades. 6 hours later, as Sarah sat in a federal facility giving her statement to investigators, she received a text message from her college roommate, Jessica Martinez in Miami. "Saw the news. You did something incredible today. Call me when you can." Sarah smiled, realizing that for the first time in days, she was looking forward to making that call. The woman in seat 2A had indeed had a secret, and it had saved everyone's life, not just the passengers aboard Flight 847, but potentially millions of Americans whose critical infrastructure had been targeted for systematic destruction. The conspiracy was exposed. The perpetrators were in custody, and the evidence was in the hands of investigators who could ensure that justice was served. Sarah Chun had started her journey as a frightened scientist running for her life, but she had ended it as the hero who helped save her country from an attack it never saw coming. Dr. Sarah Chun stood before the Senate Intelligence Committee, her testimony being broadcast live across the nation. The same woman who had fled Denver in terror 6 months earlier now spoke with quiet authority about one of the most sophisticated foreign intelligence operations ever uncovered on American soil. The Meridian Conspiracy represented a new form of warfare, Sarah told the senators. Rather than traditional military attacks, our adversaries sought to gradually compromise the very systems Americans depend on: daily health care, transportation, communications, and utilities. The goal was to create cascading failures that would appear accidental while positioning foreign-controlled alternatives as solutions. Senator Margaret Bradley, the committee chair, leaned forward with interest. "Dr. Chun, in your expert opinion, how close did this operation come to succeeding? If Flight 847 hadn't been diverted that day, if the evidence hadn't been exposed when it was, we estimate the coordinated infrastructure attacks would have begun within 3 months. The damage to public trust alone could have taken decades to repair." The hearing was being watched by millions of Americans who had learned about the conspiracy through the extensive media coverage that followed the arrests. What the public didn't know was the personal cost that Sarah's courage had extracted from those involved in stopping the plot. Dr. Michael Patterson watched the hearing from his new office at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. His quick thinking aboard Flight 847 had led to an offer to join the CDC's emergency response team, but it had also cost him his custody battle. His ex-wife's attorney had successfully argued that his involvement in terrorist incidents made him an unsuitable guardian for their daughter Emma. Patterson had made peace with the decision. His work at the CDC was preventing future attacks like the one Sarah had uncovered, and he'd been able to maintain a good relationship with Emma despite the reduced custody arrangement. Sometimes protecting what mattered most required difficult sacrifices. Maria Santos had also found her life changed by the events aboard Flight 847. Her calm professionalism during the crisis had earned her a promotion to head flight attendant. But more importantly, it had given her confidence to pursue the aviation management degree she'd been postponing for years. She was now studying at night while continuing to fly, working toward a career in airline safety management. Captain Bradley Morrison had returned to flying after a brief investigation into the flight's events, but the experience had fundamentally changed his perspective on aviation security. He now served as a consultant to the Transportation Security Administration, helping develop protocols for identifying and responding to sophisticated threats against commercial aviation. Richard Hawthorne remained in federal custody, his cooperation with investigators having earned him a life sentence rather than the death penalty he might have faced. The intelligence he provided had led to the exposure of similar operations in 17 other countries, making him one of the most valuable counterintelligence assets in recent history. But it was the broader implications of the conspiracy that continued to reshape American policy. 6 months later, FBI Director Patricia Williams addressed a packed auditorium at Georgetown University, explaining how the Meridian case had revolutionized federal approaches to infrastructure security. We learned that our adversaries had moved beyond traditional espionage into something we're calling infrastructure colonization, the gradual replacement of American systems with alternatives that appear beneficial but contain hidden dependencies. The investigation had revealed that the conspiracy extended far beyond Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Energy companies, telecommunications providers, transportation networks, and even social media platforms had been gradually infiltrated by entities with connections to foreign intelligence services. The goal was never immediate destruction, but long-term control. The beauty of the operation was its subtlety, Director Williams continued. Americans would voluntarily adopt these compromised systems because they performed better than existing alternatives. Only later would the hidden dependencies become apparent, and by then, extraction would be economically and practically impossible. Sarah's evidence had provided the roadmap for identifying and neutralizing these threats, but the scope of the cleanup effort was staggering. Congressional hearings continued weekly, with new revelations emerging regularly about the extent of foreign penetration into American infrastructure. At her home in Denver, which she'd finally been able to return to after months of protective custody, Sarah received a phone call that would define the next phase of her life. "Dr. Chun, this is Secretary Davidson from the Department of Homeland Security. I hope you're recovering well from your ordeal." "Thank you, Mr. Secretary. How can I help you?" "We have a proposition. The President has authorized the creation of a new division within DHS focused specifically on infrastructure security threats. We'd like you to lead it." Sarah looked out her window at the Colorado mountains, thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a corporate researcher worried about keeping her job. Now she was being offered the chance to protect the entire country's infrastructure. What would the position involve? You'd oversee a team of specialists from multiple disciplines: cybersecurity, engineering, economics, intelligence analysis, and more. Your job would be to identify potential infrastructure colonization efforts before they could take root, and develop countermeasures to protect critical systems. "I accept," Sarah said without hesitation. 3 weeks later, Dr. Sarah Chun walked into her new office in Washington, D.C., where she found a team of 30 specialists assembled from across the government and private sector. Their mission was to ensure that no future conspiracy could come as close to success as the Meridian operation had. On her desk was a framed photograph from Flight 847, a picture taken by a passenger during the evacuation, showing her and Dr. Patterson working together in the first-class cabin while emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft. Below the photo was a small plaque that read, "Sometimes the most ordinary day becomes the most extraordinary test." The woman in seat 2A had indeed had a secret, and it had saved everyone's life. But more than that, her courage in the face of overwhelming danger had helped save something much larger: the fundamental systems that allowed American society to function safely and securely. As Sarah reviewed the first briefing materials for her new position, She reflected on how a routine flight to Miami had become the catalyst for the most significant infrastructure, security reform in American history. The conspiracy had been stopped, the perpetrators were in prison, and new safeguards were being implemented to prevent similar threats in the future. But Sarah also knew that this victory was just the beginning. The adversaries who had orchestrated the Meridian conspiracy were still out there, developing new methods and identifying new vulnerabilities. Her job now was to stay one step ahead of them, protecting the country that had given her the opportunity to make a difference. The secret she'd carried aboard, Flight 847, had saved 300 passengers. The work she was beginning now might save 300 million Americans from threats they would never know existed. And that, Sarah reflected as she began reading her first case file, made every moment of terror and uncertainty worthwhile. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.